I spoke to our next speaker prior to us starting, and she's a Highland Parker, um, and Suzanne Peticolas, and I just wanted to. Is Suzanne here? Suzanne, come on up. How are you, Suzanne? Um, can you tell me? Can you tell me how you got acquainted with Robin and this program? I thought that was.
Yeah. Robin didn't recognize me tonight because I only met her once before, and actually I'm more acquainted with her husband in the Highland Park Dog Park, where we meet usually around 6 o'clock in the morning with our dogs, and I don't look like this. I clean up pretty well.
Yeah, right. It's a truly Highland Park story. And you also say that you're related to every Peticolas in the country. They are generally an attorney, engineer, or what do we have here? Artists. Yeah. How do you know that you're related to every Peticolas in the country?
Oh, I've traced it back, and the first Peticolas that came over many decades ago was an artist, painted miniatures. Some of his work is in the Valentine Museum in Virginia, and there's some paintings of his not on exhibit, but in the collection of the Metropolitan in New York. And there are artists in my family that go back to him, and I've traced it. I know I'm related to all of them by blood or by marriage.
That is very cool. Thank you for being here. Thank you for telling your story. And here we go.
Thank you. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm one of the lawyer Peticolas, and as a lawyer, I tell stories as my job. I don't tell my story, and I'm not going to tell my story tonight. I'm going to tell the story of one of my clients, because that's what I do as a lawyer. I give a voice to those who can't express themselves, who can't say the things that need to be said. So I'm going to tell you about, I'll call him Adam. That's not really his name. And Adam was a young man born in the Darfur region of the Sudan. For those of you who are not familiar with Sudan, the Darfur region is on the western side of the country. And he grew up in a small village. His parents, his family, subsistence farmers. His village did not have electricity. It did not have running water. It did not have a school. It did not have telephones, mail service. It was pretty primitive. He didn't measure distance in kilometers or miles. He measured it in the amount of time it took to get to some place by a donkey. So that's where he grew up. And to understand his story, you need to know that the Sudan is ethnically about 70% Arabic Sudanese, and the rest of the population is a number of different African tribes. The biggest African tribe is Fur. It's spelled F-U-R. It looks like fur, but it's pronounced Fur. And the Darfur region, Darfur means land of the Fur. Adam was a member of the Fur tribe. The the Arabic majority controlled, and still does, the government and the military, and there were constant clashes between the African tribes and the Arabic majority. And in his short life, Adam had suffered with his family repeated and episodic attacks by Janjaweed Arabic militia. They would sweep in on horses, raid the villages, steal, rape, grab up young men and put them into their militia, or if they refused, kill them. And he and his family had suffered this a number of times. The Janjaweed militia were not actually military of the Sudanese government, but they were tolerated by the government and in some cases supported by it, provided with arms. After one episode when Adam and his family had to flee to the mountains and hide out in the mountains for 3 days until the Janjaweed had left, his uncle and his father decided that he was at too high a risk because he was getting to the age where he would be a likely target of the Janjaweed. And he had recently lost 4 cousins, young men about 20 years of age, who had been killed coming back from their family farm. So his uncle and his father sold a couple of cows, smuggled him into Khartoum, which is the capital of Sudan, and arranged for him to get a passport. Now, it wasn't his passport because he didn't have a birth certificate, and who needs a birth certificate in a village where you know everyone, or you're probably related to most of them? And he couldn't also qualify for a passport because he hadn't served in the military in the Sudan, which was also required. Incidentally, even though there was no school in his village, he spoke 2 languages. He spoke 4, which was his native language, and he had learned to speak Arabic because his father taught him Arabic with the Quran. Incidentally, the Quran was probably the only paper in his village. No birth certificates. So his uncle put him on a plane to Mexico. I'm not quite sure why Mexico, with the phony passport, and he ended up at JFK Airport in New York, where he asked for asylum. And then he was promptly sent to a detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is where I met him. The detention center is slightly south of Newark Airport, nestled among warehouses. They do get exercise every day, outdoor exercise, which, by the way, is indoors. The first time Adam and I and my colleague Phil showed up in court, the judge looked at us and said, and she looked through the file and she said, "Identity is going to be a problem in this case." No shit, lady. He doesn't have a birth certificate. He doesn't have any friends here. He doesn't have any family. Who's going to identify him? Well, Phil tried to find an uncle that Adam thought was living in Egypt. He had escaped from Sudan. And while we were talking about it, it occurred to me, we don't actually have to prove that Adam is Adam. Because the asylum laws in the United States, as they're written, allow the government to grant asylum to anyone who has been persecuted or has a substantial fear of persecution on 5 grounds: religion, political belief, nationality, membership in a particular group, and there's another one, race, I think. Adam, if I could prove that he was 4, it didn't matter whether he was Adam or Joe or Scott or Matt. All it mattered was that he was 4, a member of a group that was being persecuted in Sudan. And the U.S. government reports even corroborated that. There are country reports that come out every year that the State Department puts on every single country in the world, where they evaluate the status of freedom of religion in the country, human rights, etc. So we don't have to prove he's Adam. We just have to prove he's 4. How do we do that? There's no blood test. There's no MRI. There's language. Every language, while it has grammar and rules, also has idiosyncrasies. Think about English, for example. How do you make a plural? Cat, cats. Dog, dogs. Boot, boots. You add an S. Tooth, tooths. No, teeth. Ox, oxes. No, oxen. Idiosyncrasies. Variations from the rule that native speakers will know, but not someone who's following the grammar book. So, okay, how do we get someone that can prove that he actually speaks 4? Berlitz had never heard of 4. There are only 500,000 people, I guess, that speak 4 naturally. So back to the internet. We find Angela Jacobi in Germany, who is the author of one of 2, believe it or not, there are 2 extant grammar books on 4. The other one was written by a colonial colonel in the 1930s. So we have Angela. Then we find another woman, Jan, who had served in the Peace Corps and is a linguistics professor in South Carolina. and then the chair of the linguistics department at UCLA. Now, he didn't know 4, but he figured if he had Angela and Jan and Angela's grammar book, he could design a test that would prove definitively whether Adam was 4 and a native speaker. So we had all of them put it together. They drafted a test. Of course, he couldn't read or write, a little bit of Arabic, but certainly not English, so he couldn't take a written test. He could take an oral test, but the experts were in South Carolina, South California, Southern California, Germany, and he was locked up in Elizabeth. Enter volunteer audio tape specialist, a court reporter. And by the way, these experts all did this on a volunteer basis. They drafted and designed this test, and I went in armed with the test, the audio taper, my translator. I asked the questions in English. The translator translated into Arabic. Adam answered in 4, and the audio taper taped it all. Then he digitally mastered CD-ROMs. We sent them to Germany. We sent them to South Carolina. We sent them to UCLA. And bingo, all of the experts said, no question about it, Adam is 4. So my colleague Phil and I show up in court for the hearing. We have Adam. We turn over the affidavits, the CD-ROMs, the test, and the judge looks over at the government attorney and says, well, do you have any objections to the admission of these documents? And I think maybe he was a bit cowed by all the PhDs sprinkled among the affidavits and the linguistic terms like glottal stop and Nilo-Saharan languages. And he said, no, looks good to me. Well, there was identity. Adam is 4. Adam is a member of the 4 tribe. The U.S. government reports say that the 4 are being persecuted, and he was granted asylum. Fast forward a couple of years. Adam has worked in a window factory in Maine. He's obtained his AA degree from a junior college in Oregon. He's obtained a double BA in political science and in accounting, and he's working now as a consultant for law firms. And every year on the 4th of July, and if I get a little choked up, it's because I feel passionately about this, he sends me an email, and it says, hello, Miss Suzanne. How are you? I hope you're doing well. Happy birthday, America. And the America that granted him asylum is the America, and a second chance at life, is the America I grew up in. It's the America that I'm proud of. It's the America I love, and it's the America I'm afraid we're losing, and we have to fight for. Thank you.